Welcome to the Perinatal Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Christine, your host and certified perinatal mental health professional. This podcast is all about authentic conversations. We want to open up the discussions around perinatal health and well-being, from mood and anxiety disorders to breastfeeding to grief and loss in the perinatal period, and everything in between. While this is not therapy or medical advice, it is the place where we are going to continue to open up the discussion around all things perinatal mental, physical, emotional, and sexual health to help reduce stigma and break down these barriers to support. I acknowledge that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which Perinatal Wellbeing Ontario is located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. I am proud to acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. I acknowledge that I am a settler on these lands, and it is on these ancestral and treaty lands that I live, learn, and work. Hello, and welcome to Perinatal Wellbeing, episode number 17. Today we're going to talk about postpartum sexuality with our guest, soon-to-be Dr. Benée Justice. Benée is a clinical mental health therapist with a PhD in clinical sexology. Benée recently defended her dissertation on postpartum sexuality and created an incredible curriculum for use by mental health therapists to address postpartum sexuality. In today's episode, we discuss the changes in our body postpartum, fears and concerns that might come up because of these changes, how shame and guilt can impact us when we're experiencing low desire and trying to determine our readiness for sexual activity postpartum. And then Benée shares with us how we can explore our sexuality in the postpartum period and some very important things, such as communicating with your partner and consent. This episode is an honest and open discussion about sexuality, and we use the correct terms for our genitals and experiences related to sexuality, including sexual acts. If you listen to your podcast with young kids in the room, you can decide if you want to put headphones in or listen another time. We do use gendered language in this discussion, and we acknowledge that not all birthing people identify as female. Hi, Benée. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Christine. I'm so glad to be here. What an honor. I appreciate being invited.
Absolutely. I am so excited because when I kind of, formulated these ideas about having a podcast, you were right at the top of the list of wanting to have on the podcast as a guest, because you have amazing experience and wisdom and insight into today's topic.
Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. So today we are going to talk about postpartum sexuality.
Right.
Yes, I'm so excited. And so, we've talked a lot on the podcast, kind of focusing on mental health and mental health issues in the perinatal period. But like I kind of shared at the beginning of the podcast, is that I want to cover like all aspects of health related to the perinatal period, which includes our sexual health.
Absolutely. And what's so fascinating about our sexual health is it actually kind of crosses into all of those other domains. It affects our physical well-being, our relational well-being, our emotional well-being. It's so multifaceted, our sexuality is complex.
Absolutely. Right. And you're so right. And I think that we don't talk about it enough, right? Kind of, we were talking about, what kind of language do we want to use, or how far do we want to go into this topic? And I think it's important to be honest and open and authentic and be able to open up these discussions so that other people can feel like, oh, okay, I can talk about this, or maybe I can ask my therapist about this, or maybe I can ask my friends about this, or maybe I can have a discussion with my partner about what I want postpartum sexuality to look like, or what I feel about it,
Exactly. Exactly. And I think before we start, if it's okay with you, one of the things I like to do with clients is just take a moment to realize that this topic is sacred for us as women. It's meaningful, and there's so much that we bring to the table when we think about our sexuality, our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our experiences. There's dynamics like our power and our gender identity, our sexual orientation, and so just I'd like to take a collective, deep breath around the topic and just realize that, we're just treading on sacred ground for this brief moment together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for doing that. And so, you know, we've kind of touched on too of like sometimes this isn't an easy topic for people, and there are so many influences, socialization or different backgrounds or different cultural experiences or religious experiences, whatever that looks like for people, can influence or does influence how we discuss sexuality, how we feel about discussing it. And so just wanting to honor that and bring awareness to that in this space, and that if people are not comfortable, they can absolutely, press pause on this one, check out a different episode. But we are here to like open up this discussion and say, like, it's okay to talk about it, even if it feels awkward or funny or sacred or all the things, right? It's okay. Whatever comes up for people is okay.
And even if it feels awkward or funny or uncomfortable in any way, that doesn't equate it that it doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely.
And I think especially for us as women, we're very often socialized that our bodies and our sexuality and stuff carry less weight than the weight of others. And so, yeah, it matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you start us off. Where do you want to start on this really deep, rich topic?
Right. It's incredibly complicated. Sex in the postpartum is, in fact, sex during pregnancy is also equally complicated. And I have found in doing my research for my dissertation on postpartum sexuality that there's a real gap between professional support, whether that be from mental and sexual health therapists and or our medical providers, our midwives, our OBGYNs, those persons. There's a real gap between all of the questions women have and the care and support and being able to get those answers. And very, very many times, it's not the fault specifically of the provider. I don't want to say that the intent isn't good, and I'm not calling out anyone. It's the job of the birth provider to take care of our physiological needs. But in my research, I found that so many medical providers and so many mental health providers are incredibly uncomfortable around the topic of sexuality, and they genuinely do not feel that they are prepared to adequately do so. And so therefore, now what? And so even during pregnancy, women receive about 30% of women in research say that they actually receive any kind of information on sexual functioning. And so in the postpartum, that's even worse. So if a woman actually is able to receive information in the postpartum period, it is maybe around contraception. Then that's it. And so then what next? How do we actually get really accurate, good, helpful information that is also super honest?
Yes.
Right. And so, there's a real gap. And that's one of the things that's my passions, is trying to close that gap.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'm thinking, is that, you mentioned this is a systems issue, right? It's not down to a single practitioner or even, a type of practitioner necessarily, like OBGYN, for example. But I think it does speak to the system is not set up and doesn't equip practitioners to have these discussions, to be able to provide some education or support around this. And then people are left without, like you said, 30% of people only receiving any information about it in pregnancy, even less in the postpartum period.
Correct. Correct. And usually it's around, don'ts.
Right.
If you do receive that information, right? So, but specifically in postpartum, I think the really great starting point, if I might kind of just launch in here,
Go for it.
is that for us to recognize that there is so much going on at once. I mean, we have all of the physiological things that are happening. Like I mentioned, there's our emotional things that are happening. There's our relational things. There's levels of sociocultural. What are the expectations around who I am and what I'm supposed to be as mommy? And just to think, okay, and I'm supposed to somehow squeeze my sexual health into the midst of all of this myriad of challenges at once. And so, I think oftentimes it's really easy for us to push that one area of our lives to the side and say, okay, this can wait.
I'm curious, why do you think that is? Because I was thinking the same thing, that like that can easily and does easily get pushed to the side, even though, it is part of our health. It's a piece of our health. It's our sexual health. It is related to our health. So why is it that that piece, the sexual health, does and can so easily be pushed to the side? Why do you think that is?
Well, this could be like a topic in and of itself, this whole like what mommies are supposed to be and do.
Right.
And I really think there's a lot around what all of a sudden you no longer exist as a separate autonomous individual. Your sole purpose is to care for and nurture and protect and love and grow this person that is now on the outside of you. And so your wants and needs so easily get tabled. I mean, how often do we say to ourselves, oh my word, I have had to use the bathroom for the last 2 hours and I'm finally here. So if we so easily push off something so basic as I need to, use the restroom, bigger issues like sex, especially ones that are complicated around those weird emotions and feelings about ourselves. And so if we can just kind of push that to the side and not have one more worry, it's an easy thing to do. But I think we short ourselves because we lose out on an opportunity for this this amazing activity that can really be a stress reliever and an anxiety reliever and a feel good moment for us, right?
Right. Yeah. And so it kind of sometimes becomes a source of anxiety and stress instead of being that stress reliever, or this way to connect, or, this way to feel good.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So I think really it's just great for women to not overthink what's it going to be like. I think there's so many fears too that are around resuming sex after birth. And so if we really get in our heads about it and we say, well, what if it's not great? Or what if my partner no longer finds me attractive? Our bodies have changed, right? And so there's a great deal of concern around body image. In fact, research shows that 40% of women are still very dissatisfied with their bodies at 1 year postpartum.
Wow.
And that can play a really big role. And there are things that happen to our bodies that nobody tells us. And so we've gotten used to the fuller breasts and the fuller hips and thighs, perhaps, but we maybe didn't expect our vulvas to look different,
Right.
to maybe have a different color. Our nipples have a different color. Our breasts maybe are even more hang a little lower on our bodies. Our vulva might hang lower on our bodies, right?
Yep.
And you know, even pleasure centers can kind of move around and change a little bit with pregnancy and birth. So there's a lot that's happened to our bodies that make us say, I'm not even sure what I like or don't like.
Right.
And how can I submit these vulnerabilities for a partner's judgment?
Right. Right. And even like you said, not even knowing or being prepared for these
Mm-hmm.
changes, not really talking about these changes, other than those ones like, okay, fuller breasts and fuller hips, things like that. But really getting into more intimate things and details of how our bodies change. If we don't even know that that's going on, how, like, but we feel it and we observe it and all those things, how do we articulate that and think about it and interpret it and then share it if we have a partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Right. And so that's just our appearance and what's going on in our heads. Then we're actually, we're dealing with physiological healing. Of
Yeah.
course, there's abrasions and tears. And if we had an assisted delivery vaginally, there's, perhaps an episiotomy that's healing, those types of things. If we had a C-section, we have a surgical incision that's healing. Our pelvic floor is healing.
Yes.
So it's not just just the vagina, just the vulva that's involved in what needs to heal, but our pelvic floors do too. In fact, I think the most recent research that I read was about 36% of women have pelvic floor injuries from birth and delivery. So yeah, there's a lot happening.
Absolutely. There is a lot happening. And I know this could be another episode, and we've touched on this in other episodes of, not having that support after delivery to, help heal these injuries or, get support around recovery and like rehabilitation. Right.
Exactly.
Whereas if you, I always just use the example, like if you had a knee replacement, you would have your rehabilitation set up, you have your appointment set up for after the surgery when you go to your first appointment, and then you attend once or twice a week and you do your exercises, and you're told specifically you have to do all these exercises and this is what you do, and you're shown them. Why
Right.
don't we have that for delivery?
Right. There's no plan. The only plan is that return for that infamous 6-week check, right?
Yeah.
And actually ACOG recently released that I think about 40% of women don't even attend that check. And so they're looking into what can we do to increase those numbers, of course. But in fairness to our medical providers, how many of us have actually even been able to recognize a sexual challenge or articulate a sexual concern at that 6-week mark anyhow? So wouldn't it be amazing if we had this 3-month or 6-month check-in with our provider who really started talking to us about what was going on with us sexually, what were our concerns, what were the challenges we were facing, and
Be amazing.
let's get to addressing them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're right, like 6 weeks can feel for some people so fast. like it can come really fast after the delivery. And for some people, 6 weeks post delivery, sex might not even be anywhere in the realm of possibility or thoughts or, even desire, might not even be there at 6 weeks. So like you said, to articulate that to a healthcare provider might not feel possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you just brought up something so key, that lack of desire. That is actually the most common reason that women seek out any type of sexual therapy or sexual counseling is feeling like their libido isn't where they believe it should be, or their partner believes it should be. Right. And, low libido is something that is so common in postpartum. Not the hormone adjustment, we have much lower progesterone and testosterone to start off with. So we have that. Yeah. But, I hate the whole blame anything and everything on hormones, because there's, as if that were just, made everything okay. Well, right. But there's so much, there's just so much happening in postpartum. We're all on overload. Yeah. And if you think about when you are not pregnant and you've not just had a baby, our desire and arousal and all of the things that we think about that go into libido, there's ebbs and flows of that throughout our entire lives. But the spotlight just really gets shined on it in postpartum, and we think, okay, when am I going to want to? But 25% of women feel that they resume sexual activity too soon. And so I think a lot of that is that pressure of feeling like I need to, I should, I'm expected to, my 6-week check is come and gone, my partner's expecting it, my partner needs it, all of these things we tell ourselves. And so we just short circuit the whole notion of our desire and just jump right in.
Absolutely. It kind of feels like and sounds like it's not at that point about desire. It's about pleasing the other person, or, meeting this expectation, whether it's a gender expectation, a social expectation, or, cultural expectation, all the things, right? It's external. Mm-hmm. It's not internal of what the birthing person wants or desires, right?
Yeah. And, so many women, we are disconnected from our bodies, but, it's interesting. I feel like in birth, in pregnancy, and in birth, we even really disconnect even more from our bodies. We submit ourselves to medical exams and to, medical, professionals where objective data outrules our emotions and our feelings. And the same thing with the birth process. There's things that happen that are, all of a sudden we're exposed and we're having exams when we're in pain, and we're, there's so much happening to our bodies all in that moment. It's very easy to disconnect. And I think sometimes that disconnect stays, and we, just actually find ourselves in a place where there's a barrier to sexual pleasure because we're not really fully in our bodies, and we kind of need to relearn that.
I think that is such a crucial topic, and I feel like that probably also could be its own podcast episode.
I know.
Absolutely, because sometimes that disconnection is actually, survival, right? If we are actually having difficulty in our labor and delivery, or there is, birth trauma happening or has happened, that disconnection, that dissociation really is
right.
A survival skill, right? So we can make it through. And thank you for that skill in that moment when we need it. But you're right, like sometimes it doesn't, then we don't reconnect, we don't come back online, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think too, because we don't even have a chance to heal. That's the
Right.
thing. If you go in for a surgery at any time, other time of your life, you have like this recovery period, right? But after delivery, you get home, and then regardless of what state your body is in or what you've been through, you're right into caregiving
Mhm.
someone else, not yourself. So there's
Mhm.
not even like a moment to heal. And so I think too, again, that disconnection, that dissociation can stay out of need. I'm going to kind of disconnect from my body. So I'm not like, worried about the pain or thinking about the pain or even, feeling it as intensely. And then I'm just like continuing on, right? I can go if I'm disconnected from myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a good point. And so many pains and new challenges arise at that, so we can't even pause for the moment of thinking about what came up for us maybe emotionally during our birth. In all of that, we're also trying to balance lactation, and is that working or not working, and does it hurt, and and
Yes.
you're like, that's surprising, that really is incredibly uncomfortable. And all of the joys of the blissful mommy and baby nursing, and there's a lot of stuff all around just lactation. And you've got all of this role stress, these new jobs that are coming in, that all of a sudden, how do you divide the jobs up, and how do I handle all of this new identity of, especially if this is baby number one, what does this mean for me, now that I'm mom or mommy, or however a person identifies. I know I'm using a lot of gendered language, and of course I recognize that there are plenty of persons who don't identify as female, or maybe are trans men having children. There's a lot of non-binary persons who give birth, so I definitely don't want to marginalize NB folks when I use this language, but I typically speak in these terms because I feel like it's often these are the persons that seek out, podcasts like yours. So,
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you so much for acknowledging that. And absolutely, these topics and issues can touch anyone who welcomes a baby into the family. And like you said, all those changes and like integrating these new parent parts into our system, right? Like, who am I now in the context of being a parent? Who am I? How does like being a partner intersect with being a parent? Or how does being an employee when I go back to work, if that's the case, intersect with being a parent? Like, how does, you know, how am I functioning in the world now as a parent as well as all my other parts? Even that in itself is
right.
so overwhelming.
Right, right. And I think there's this strange taboo that still exists between moms and sex, right? So, can moms be sexy? And that, I think, gets in the head of a lot of people too, who say, okay, wait a second. Now that I'm mom, how am I as a independent person sexually apart from my infant? Especially, I think, when perhaps a mom is breastfeeding, and there's some things like, okay, wait, these breasts are for feeding the baby. No, these breasts are for my sexual enjoyment or my partner's enjoyment. And so there kind of gets to be a little bit of a ick factor around that for people to talk about it, express it, figure it out, you think it through. And so, yeah.
all of that is really hard to navigate as a birthing person, and trying to even figure that out in your own head of like, what are my own thoughts and feelings around that, around my body, around how I'm feeding my child, how my body has changed, all those things. And then we have all of these, again, the external factors that come in, like how is that portrayed in pop culture, in, film and even music or art. All of those things I think have really big impacts on us. It's a double standard. I think we have, people that say, okay, you're a mother now, and your breasts are for nursing your child, and they're not for sexual purposes. And then we go out and nurse our children in public, and then we're shamed for doing that. Put those away. We don't want to see those. And I think that can cause like so much turmoil for us, because like, well, then what do you want me to do? Like, do you want me to be this, mother who, again, I'm using very gendered language too, but like from my experience, like, do you want me to be this like mother who feeds her child with her breasts, and that was my main goal in life, but only do it behind closed doors? Like, don't feed your child when they're hungry, and surely don't do it in the middle of a mall, or, I know this is like off topic, but I think it just impacts how we feel about our bodies, which then impacts our desire or our lack of desire, and how we're then re-engaging in our sexuality postpartum.
You're so right. And so that's not off topic then, because what you just talked about was one of those ways of, and them 1 million ways to evoke shame for women. We have shame around our bodies. We have shame around our desires and our wants. And we have so much shame that's just the volume, I think, on that little shame knob in our brains really gets turned up in postpartum. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And even like, going back to desire, right? Like, what are my desires, or what do I feel, or what does feel good for me now? And like pre-kids, right? Okay, be in your sexuality and enjoy your sexuality, but like not too much, right? Like don't be too out there, right? There's all these double standards, right? But like live your best life and explore your sexuality and all those things. And then postpartum, you need to shut that down now because you're a mother, and that's not appropriate. And again, even pop culture and seeing around us, like how many films or TV shows portray like, now I'm a mom and like I don't want sex, or oh, our sex life is over now that we have kids, ha ha ha. And it makes it like that's the expectation.
Exactly.
And then what if we are in the postpartum period and we're like, oh man, like I can't wait to get back to sex and exploring my sexuality and being intimate with my partner. Oh, but should I be so excited about it because now I'm a mom?
Right.
And maybe I should kind of quiet it down a bit. It's like, again, it's like we get whiplash, I think, from like, what am I supposed to think?
Right. That internal monitor is just constantly just letting us know one thing, then the exact opposite, right? And so I think that makes it even more difficult for us to determine our readiness, because, there are, like you said, there is this whole stereotypical, well, my sex life is over because now we're parents. And then you're standing in the supermarket line and you see the latest cover of whatever magazine superstar who had a baby 3 weeks ago. And she's like, I can't wait to get back in bed with my boo. And so,
Exactly.
and you're still like, okay, so I'm not ready or I am ready. And so I think it's super critical. And one of the things I really try to do as a therapist is help people to determine with their own autonomy, their level of readiness. And I think it's just, it's super critical that we give ourselves that time. I love to talk about postpartum as this sexual reset. It's like your opportunity to do a complete do-over. There was the me before baby, and now there's the sexual me post baby. And it's this great, time to rethink, to reimagine. Who am I sexually? What do I want from a healthy sex life? What do I need from a healthy sex life? And not to put so much emphasis on what worked before, because that doesn't matter anymore. That's behind you. What works now? What feels good now? What brings me pleasure now? And so if you kind of give yourself this framework in your brain that says, I get a do-over, I get to redecide, I get to relearn my body, and I get to reteach my partner what I like and don't like, and what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and help my partner to see this isn't about anything that you might be doing wrong. This is about the me that I am now and the ways I've changed, and really give yourself permission to set that pace and to set that tone, and for it to be a really positive one.
Right. And yeah, like you said, not the, oh, we've had kids, so now our sex life is over, but it's this like re-exploring, reconnecting. And I would think then it would be super important to do that work of reconnecting to our body.
Definitely.
To be able to then start that exploration to figure out, where am I? What do I like? What do I not like? We have to reconnect to our body to do that.
So it's fascinating. So much of the research talks about, looking at sexual activity in the postpartum. And very often the research questions are, when does the birth giver resume penetrative sex? How frequent is that penetrative sex? Are they achieving orgasm? And they're just looking at boxes to be checked, right? And instead of just, I hate the goal-oriented, male-centric approach to, trying to determine what postpartum sex looks like. And we forget that with this goal of, we're finally doing it, I'm finally going to do the deed, the thing, that it's time, and we're going to have sex. And I use sex in quotes because we often have such a narrow definition of that we forget to be present for the pleasure.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, like, do you think also that kind of that feeling of, I have to do this for my partner, again, all those external influences of like, by 6 weeks, I quote unquote should be ready to have sex, right? There's that shame word. And so maybe also I'm not fully reconnected to my body again. I'm doing this anyway because I think I'm supposed to. And then how do I even experience pleasure, or, what do I take away from that experience if I'm doing it out of like duty or shame,
Right.
guilt?
Right.
That, I feel like that would complicate it.
You were talking about reconnecting to your body, and I took it on a little bit of a tangent, but actually the research shows that when researchers started really asking the right questions about resuming sexual activity, and women in qualitative research were starting to say things like, well, I've been masturbating. We're like, oh, wait, women are actually interested in sexual activity. They're interested in resuming this side of themselves that our research is not telling us because we weren't asking the right questions. And I love that women are smart enough to do this and say, okay, new body, tell me what I need to know. And so I really encourage clients to do that exploration, to kind of figure out what is working now. And again, like, don't focus on what worked before. And I also really love the notion of really expanding how we define sex.
Yes.
And I think, again, we have a very narrow viewpoint, and we say, well, sex is penis in vagina sex, and we have this or sex is only penetration if there's not a penis owner in the relationship, whatever. And
Right.
so I really want my clients to say, wow, sex is so many things. How are all the ways that my body experiences pleasure? So I really get my clients to think about, what gives me pleasure? And we start off by thinking, wow, the taste of chocolate is so pleasurable. The warmth of the sunshine on my face as spring is starting to come is such a pleasurable feeling. And so we think about, okay, these are things that are interactions with my body that bring me pleasure. So how else can I expand this? And what are ways I can think about sex? And, again, getting away from this whole goal-specific, goal-oriented format and say, man, a sexy, steamy shower where we're getting each other all soaked up and really doing some amazing, kissing and connecting, or, maybe just a great body massage with, some scented oils and candles, and experiencing pleasure in that way is such a great way to reconnect to our bodies in postpartum, and well worth the effort. In fact, I often have clients say, let's just take penetrative sex off the table. That's just the only thing you can't do. Right. And what are other things you can enjoy? Well, we could try, toys and vibrators. We can try oral sex. We can try mutual masturbation. We can find ways that our hands and our tongues work for us, and really kind of open the door to expand ways that we can now define we're having sex, right? And when we do that and we say, oh yeah, that amazing hot shower we took together, where we connected to each other in an intimate, personal way, that was sex. I didn't have to be penetrated to call it sex. And then you walk away saying, yeah, we had sex. And you're not in that frame of mind that says, oh, we haven't had sex for, let's see, it's been 8 weeks now. And so it's so much more expansive, and we open the door to not just pleasure, but play. I think about when we were little, when we'd get in a sandbox, and every possible thing that was in there, from a plastic fork to a spoon or whatever else, became these tools of our imagination, and with abandon, we were throwing things into our sandbox and out of our sandbox, and running to the house and grabbing measuring cups and running back out, and, and playing. And I think oftentimes we lose that ability to play and to make sex fun, right? So,
and that sounds so lovely. Like, it just sounds so much not easier, but like the word that's coming to me is safer, but I'm cautious that, it's not necessarily that, but that taking away that like goal of penetrative sex, for example, because it feels like this pressure, and then, well, I have to do that at 6 weeks, for example, and I don't want to. And then people do it because they feel they have to, and they're not getting any pleasure or enjoyment out of it. And again, not disconnected or not connected, to their body. I think that can further disconnect us from our body. Well, if I have to keep doing this, I'm going to disconnect because this is not for me. Like, this is not what I want, but I feel like I have this duty, or, all of those things that factor in. But just how you described of even like feeling the sunshine on your face, like, I think that's just a lovely way of reconnecting to your body. And it doesn't have to be, okay, reconnect to your body and sexuality by having penetrative sex at the 6-week mark. That does not feel safe. Like, that's the word that's just coming to me. Like, that feels scary, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And consent is such a huge part of that. And so oftentimes we give consent to a partner where our brain is like saying, no, I'm not consenting. And that sticks with us. Our mind knows that we didn't consent. And so we're only creating a problem between ourselves and our partner. And then it sets up all of these terrible things like resentment and more shame and more guilt and layers of yucky things that you just don't need added in.
Yes, exactly. And then how do we feel like sexy when we're like feeling shame and guilt and disconnection and, all the things, right? That's not
Right.
inducive, to sexual connection. Right.
And we're socialized, like we had talked about before, we're socialized as women to meet the needs of other people.
Absolutely.
And our bodies are a collection of body parts that are meant to serve other people. And so we are, our body did the work of its parts by growing and nurturing and delivering a baby. Our body is doing the work of its parts by breastfeeding. So our body should just continue collectively to do the work of its parts to satisfy a partner. And I think that's dangerous way to think. It is our partner's responsibility to take ownership of their sexual needs being fulfilled. Absolutely. And it's a little crass, but honestly, nobody died by not getting laid.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
If women in their postpartum period are able to rediscover their bodies with masturbation, their partners can be just equally happy doing the same for a period of time. And I think that's where communication is super critical, right? Because we have to let our partner know what's on our minds. And, everything from, I'm a little bit worried how you might, feel about how I look. I'm a little bit worried about how I feel about how I might look. I'm concerned that it's going to hurt. I'm concerned that I'm not ready. I'm concerned that everything's going to be different. If we have these open, honest conversations with our partner and we really can communicate our needs, that can truly lessen anxiety because we've clarified our expectations to each other. So we get to talk, our partner gets to talk, and we're able to say, these are my needs and wants, and I hear you, and these are my needs and wants. And how can we find some middle ground here where we're both respected and we're both honored? And, we're continuing to do the work to connect. But let's just connect by giving each other amazing back rubs tonight,
Right. And building, building that intimacy and connection, in a way that feels good for both people, and not just, like you said, getting to that goal of penetrative sex to please our partner, for example.
Right. And that brings up another goal, and that's orgasm, after postpartum. really have a problem when people use the words achieve and orgasm together. I don't love that at all, because again, there's a goal, right? So I love to say experience orgasm with my clients because it's like a bonus to your pleasure. It's a great, great bonus. And it's one that we definitely would love to have added into their repertoire.
Yeah.
But certainly in postpartum, some women do experience some orgasmic difficulty. And that is sometimes related to pelvic floor dysfunction, sometimes related to healing, sometimes related to just, again, those body changes. And so I can't emphasize enough to be patient with yourself and to love yourself and to give yourself room to pivot and, just like I said, recreate this person, this sexual person. And, your whole life has changed. Your whole life is forever changed. So what a great opportunity to say, okay, if everything's changing, then I have this blank canvas here that I want to paint on. And what do I want it to look like?
Absolutely. And I love that reframing of, instead of using the word achieve, because the opposite of achieve can be failure. Like I failed to achieve orgasm, right? So there's something wrong with me, or, I'm deficient, or now I'm a mom, so I'm not as sexual, and there's something wrong with me, or, so much negativity, right? Where, changing that perspective and, experiencing orgasm is so much different than trying to achieve it. And that's what I have to get to. And if we don't get to it, it's like this big, huge letdown. And, same as, not experiencing that penis and vagina or, penetrative sex, is like, we can connect in other ways and still feel really good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And so I think, how do we actually come to that communication is something that is so commonly like, okay, I get what you're saying, but when I go home and tell my partner this, how do I, quote unquote, turn them down and without there being, hard feelings and miscommunication and, oh my goodness, the poor person my poor baby has waited for all of this time for us to reconnect and that sort of a thing. So one of the things I like to have my clients do is to really, truly, and it sounds kind of funny, to negotiate, but to really negotiate what you can do in the moment. And so if you were to say to your partner, hey, could you please get these dishes for me? I'm tapped out. I've got to bathe the baby, and all of these dishes in the kitchen are piling up. So your partner might say, absolutely, I will be glad to do that as soon as I am done watching this show. I'll be done in 15 minutes. Will that be okay? That would be great. Okay. How simple was that negotiated?
Right.
Nobody was fraught or worried. And, so if we could do that same thing with our sexual communication with our partner, where our partner might say to you, your partner might say, hey, I would really, how about tonight? Let's do it. And so perhaps you might want to clarify, do you mean tonight, let's have intercourse? Yes, that's what I'm asking for. Can we do that tonight? And so if you are not feeling the readiness, you're not feeling the moment, you're not feeling like that's something you're capable of giving, you might respond with, that sounds amazing. But right now in this moment, I'm not able to give that to you. How about instead tonight we have oral sex? And your partner says, oh yeah, that sounds great. I am down for that too. Let's do that. And so, or perhaps you're not feeling in the sexual mood at all, but you still counter back with some way that you can give to them in a way that negotiates that their need is met. So you might say, I am unable to, I'm tapped out right now. I'm exhausted from the touching and the breastfeeding and the, and the toddler, needing me, all of those things. Right now, I'm unable to give that to you. But what I can give you is, and perhaps you offer to your partner something that meets that intimacy need for them. Perhaps it's in a sexual way. I'll hold you while you masturbate. I'll give you some private time by yourself while you go and do whatever it is that works for you, whether that be, erotica or whatever. So whatever we can do to kind of negotiate that back and forth makes that communication lighter. Everybody feels they're winning. Nobody feels disrespected. Nobody feels unheard. And it becomes like a positive thing.
Yes, because our needs are being met. Just not in, this way that we think it's supposed to happen, right? But we can have the discussion and we can like meet our needs in creative ways or different ways, or ways that feel good for us in the moment. And that's going to shift and change, like you said, right? Like throughout our lifetime, right? And so we can totally adapt and shift and change in the postpartum period when it would be really helpful to do so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that. And I think too, because when we feel like awkward to talk about that and have those discussions with our partners, I think that can contribute to kind of actually just shutting down on the topic completely. We don't talk about it. So then, maybe our partner asks us if we can have sex or, tries to initiate it. And we're like, no, just because maybe that fear comes in, but then we're afraid to have a discussion around it. So we think it's either what they're asking or it's nothing. And so we shut down the opportunity to connect and have intimacy and feel good on a different level.
Right. And so I think sometimes we shut down so many opportunities for intimacy because we're afraid it might lead to sexual intimacy. So our partner might say, "Oh, baby, you just look amazing today. You just look so hot standing there, cooking those sloppy joes or whatever." And so your partner really might not be trying to get sex from you. They might just be really letting you know, you're beautiful. You're a beautiful person to me, and I enjoy the sight of you. Or if your partner comes up behind you and taps you on the booty and says, "Oh man, I just love the feeling of your body," take that for what it is. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And we can
Don't just shut them down and say, "Get away from me," because you think that what they're trying to do is, take an opportunity that will lead to something sexual when that's not what you want. So you're right. That fear kind of starts to take over for us, and we try to shut it down in every way we can. And again, we've been socialized like that as women, where we have unwanted sexual experiences just walking down the street, right? And so it's so easy for us to just, shut down and try to deflect those. And we do it without thinking. And that's why consent is as critical as it always has been in your relationship. So even in that negotiation session where I said you agreed to do something later on, consent is always something that can be withdrawn, always. And both partners need to fully recognize that. I know that I told you today at 5 that I was going to be down for this, but I did not experience the evening to completely disintegrate in the way it has. And I am just no longer even able to give that. can we restart this conversation tomorrow?
Absolutely. And I think that's so important. And knowing that just because you're in an intimate relationship or, you're partnered with someone does not give anyone carte blanche to do whatever they want, whenever they want. Like, consent is not just about two strangers, hooking up and giving consent. It's even, in your intimate relationship with your partner, with whoever you're with, giving and not giving that consent when it doesn't feel right. And that's okay. And like everyone being open to that and understanding, like you said, it could be like, I just don't want to right now, or I don't feel well, or I'm tired, or my pelvic floor still hurts after delivery, or whatever that is. But knowing like it is okay to say no, it's okay to even get into it and you're like, oh gosh, this doesn't feel good. It actually still hurts. And I didn't know that it would. We need to stop, and absolutely having that respect for your partner to stop when they ask you to stop is so important.
And if you have ongoing conversations about consent, like you're talking about, stopping in the middle and being able to withdraw your consent at that time. If you always are talking about consent in a way that's super healthy, what a feeling of safety that gives you to enter into a territory that you're a little unsure about. Because you have the willingness, your partner is giving you that freedom to say, you know what, if we get started and this isn't working, you absolutely can say this isn't working. And wow, aren't you so much more willing to give it a go if you know that there's not all of this sighing and, oh, I'm so, frustrated, but you said you would, and all of that. So we can avoid all of that by just really communicating, right?
Absolutely. And that in turn is going to like continue to build that intimacy, right? Like that's going to foster that intimacy and that, even that readiness, so to speak. I think it can help that just in terms of saying, when I am ready, there is this like respectful, space where I can explore, what I want to do with my partner. And I know that they're going to respect me and they will listen to me. And if it's not feeling good, or if I want to do something different, like they will listen to that and respect. And absolutely that creates so much safety. Right?
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that, I love when you mentioned, because I always like to ask and I always like to say, how does this translate in real life? How do we do this in real life when these conversations can feel awkward, or maybe like a lot of partners don't necessarily talk about sex. They have sex, but they don't talk about it. So what are your suggestions for your clients and for anyone listening to like approach those discussions?
Right. So oftentimes I feel like when that's an area that is a little bit uncomfortable, it's an area that you haven't really wandered into with this whole, I'm communicating to you about my wants and needs. I find that sometimes using some different maybe apps that are available on, on your phones, or different quizzes that you could take online that kind of talk about, there's things like yes, no, maybe lists, where partners can, and then there's apps that offer the same, like the yes, no, maybe. Spicer is a great app, I think, that gives each person in the partnership an opportunity to say the things that they would try and that they try or they definitely wouldn't. And then it gives you a match of what you both said, of your yeses together. And so there's not a lot about like, well, Christine said no to this, and this,
Right.
So take that off of your list, my friend. But instead, it kind of just makes it a fun way to open up that conversation. So it's a good way to get kind of get some talking going or whatever. So if that's an area of discomfort for you, I certainly would suggest, going to your app store and checking out a couple of different fun apps. There's another app that I recently discovered that I think is really kind of fun, that is called Kama, and it's Kama, and it offers a whole lot of just tutorials and little tips and things like that. And so you might just, you and your partner just download it on your phone and say, what did you watch today? Which one did you listen to? And, that might even get the conversation started if you both agree to download an app, or maybe you sit on the couch together and say, let's watch this one. They're just a few minute little tutorials on things or conversations about things that are kind of fun.
Right.
So perhaps trying that is a good way to kind of get conversations started.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And there is a little bit of that, like, just try and see what happens. Right. Like, just, I like to say, okay, it's an experiment, right? You can go back to not discussing sex, for example, and intimacy, but maybe just try it as an experiment and see what happens, and if it doesn't go pear-shaped and it does go okay, and then it does open up the discussion and it does feel okay, then keep going with it.
Right. So pick your time and your place for your conversation.
Right.
It's not going to go as well if you're, 10 minutes from getting to your mother-in-law's house with a casserole in your lap and a baby crying in the back seat,
Right.
So, yeah. And then also I often say that it's not the best time to lay in bed after something didn't go well and say, well, that didn't go well. And these are the reasons why.
Right. Yeah. Give some space. Yeah. Like reflect on it maybe the next day or something.
Right. So set aside some time, maybe a little date night where even if you're just able to put baby in stroller and just take a nice long walk and have a chat as you go around the block or whatever, just get some conversations going. And I think the more, instead of having the talk, if we just constantly have a conversation that is fluid and can always be opened and closed and continues, and we can say, hey, let's put a pin in this and get back to it and another time. And people can have their space from conversations too. We can opt out of a conversation because we're no longer comfortable, but we have to agree to come back to it to make sure our partner always has that feeling of being valued and heard.
Yep, absolutely. And kind of like using that assertive communication as that baseline, right? Where we're listening, we're openly, actively listening, and we are using clear, open, honest communication, right? And being as authentic as possible, which requires vulnerability, but hopefully we feel we can be vulnerable with our partner, that's hopefully part of that healthy relationship, that you're in. And then I think too, exploring further, maybe external supports at that point where maybe like, okay, these discussions are not happening, or we don't feel safe, or we really don't know how to approach it. And then maybe, looking for some external support, like someone like yourself, like a sex therapist, or, even like you said, looking online for different things and different supports, and to use those to start the conversation.
Right. So definitely sex therapists are a great underused tool. I don't think there's enough of us.
Yes.
For one, but you can check online, looking through ASECT. We can maybe put that in the show notes.
Sure.
To find a sex therapist near you that might be able to offer their services. And there are mental health providers who are able to talk about sexuality with you. So that doesn't mean that all mental health therapists are uncomfortable with the topic. But in all honesty, we had very little training within our, mental health degrees. As you and I've talked, and most therapists will say, I think 90% of therapists say they did not feel adequately trained to deal with sexuality with their clients. So, wow. So therapists have to do that extra work, but write down your thoughts, write down the things that are struggling with and that you need help with. Give yourself that little list and, ask a therapist for a little 15-minute interview.
Absolutely.
And see if they would be a fit for you and the challenges you're experiencing.
Absolutely. I know we've touched on, like, through the discussion, kind of where there are gaps in services, and knowing that definitely from a systems perspective, there's a big gap in education and, how the system is set up to support, people in the postpartum period. I will say, especially women in the postpartum period, there's a lot lacking in the care that we receive. In the space of postpartum sexuality and, kind of exploring that and bringing that back online, and what do you want to see change in this space, or maybe what do you think could be helpful to, help people discover their sexuality in the postpartum period?
Oh, that's such a great question.
It's a big one.
and such a big one, because I find myself as a professional really wanting to lean almost into that macro level approach where I am an advocate and a teacher within the realm of sex therapy and mental health counseling about the postpartum challenges that are so unique that affect how a woman experiences her sexuality, or a birth giver experiences their sexuality in that period of time. Again, I continue to use the words woman and she and her. Unfortunately, all of our research is on female cisgender persons, female identified cisgender birth givers. And so I continue to kind of often have that lens when I speak about the research, because our research hasn't caught up to our fully understanding the gender binary, and the reason we should just throw that binary out at this point. But definitely I would love, as a therapist, to hopefully bring a better awareness to other therapists so that they could therefore be really equipped to help a client. We get so busy with our clients and our own lives, and we go from one client to the next, to the next, to the next, and we write our notes, and then we've got to take care of things that are going on in our own personal and family. And so how do we find all of that extra time to research a very specific need or concern? And so I think if therapists were really fully aware of the complexities of sexuality in birth and postpartum, they would be all in for, okay, how do I help? What do I need to know? So yeah, I'd love to see that change. And, a systemic issue, I'd love to just for women to feel that they have the right to pleasure. They have the right to continue to enjoy their sexuality as a part of who they are. It's a part of how we see ourselves, how we see the world. And it's completely part of our identity. And to push that up by the side because we think that we should, or we think we don't deserve it, or we think it's too scary, or we think it's too big. I would love for women to say to themselves with that internal dialogue, no, it matters.
Yes. And like we talked about, like, it's a part of our health. It's a facet of our health, meaning it is important, right? And part of our functioning. And so it is important, and it is okay to want to figure that out for ourselves in the postpartum period and beyond. And it's okay to want to explore that and want to have these discussions, and hopefully by continuing to, I guess, publicly open up these discussions, right? Then people can, say, oh, hey, I heard this podcast, or, to their friends, even hey, I listened to this podcast, you listen to it. And then, kind of spread the word, and just open up these discussions. Let's just start and keep talking.
Absolutely. And that normalizes what postpartum sexuality is about and what it feels like and the experiences women have. I think so often we exist in isolation and say to ourselves, am I even normal?
Yes.
Is this normal? Is this supposed to happen? Is it supposed to be like this? And it looks like my friend over here and my friend over there and my sister last year are doing great, and this has got to be a me problem. And if the more we can have this conversation that this is normal. And what I mean by normal is that it's common and it's expected, and there's not something that is wrong with you. It's literally a phase of life. And I always want my clients to say, I always tell them, you're going to leave postpartum wiser, not wounded.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
And if we can have that hope that that's going to be the case, and that we can navigate through those challenges and know that sexual concerns can be addressed and can be managed, then that's so encouraging. So man, let's spread the word.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They can be addressed and they can be managed, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because if we don't know, if we're not exploring and connecting, and so then we don't know what needs to be addressed, never mind how to address it or how we want to address it. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important, and it's all valid. It's again, it's okay, whatever thoughts or feelings you're having about it, towards yourself, your partner, your body, all the things. It's okay. And it is complex, right? Like you said, there's so many layers to it. And even just talking about what you've shared with us today, there's so much that contributes to how we experience our own sexuality and arousal and all the things, that it's okay that it feels complex.
Absolutely. And I love that sexual researchers are really catching up with the way that women experience sex and their bodies, and desire and arousal and orgasm and all of those things. We're finally getting a context of what it's like to be in a body that has a vulva, and what is that like. And we're seeing that we've used such a male-centric medical lens for so long.
Yeah. And all of it, all contributes to how we perceive it, how we feel it, how we experience it, right? Not just the medical, perspective, and okay, your stitches are out and you've healed, quote unquote, and so you can go ahead and have penetrative sex, right? It's okay, well, what about my heart? What about my brain? What about my fears and concerns and my desires? And all those things are important and factor into it.
And I think so often we think that green light means you should, and that green light from your birth provider just means you are now at a stage of healing where you will no longer get an infection. Right. It doesn't mean you're ready. That's the internal green light that we've got to seek.
Absolutely. And so what are some, I know you mentioned some resources that you like to use, but are there any other resources that you want to put out there, which I will put everything in the show notes, any books or other podcasts or anything like that that you would recommend for people just in terms of trying to open up this discussion?
I wish I could say, oh, there are these 5 amazing books or whatever, but I think, like you and I have discussed, there's a huge gap in what's going on, what's being told and related to women from a professional perspective. The internet will yield you all kinds of strange information, and some of it can be very good, but some of it can be so it's such a sex selling kinds of atmosphere that's supposed to be so positive, and you go get it, girl, that you finish reading it and you feel worse.
Right.
And so, I wish that there were more and better resources. I am part of what my dissertation project actually was creating a curriculum for therapists to help them to have a resource like this, because I honestly don't think there are very many out there. So I would love for any listener to prove me wrong and to say, no, here's this great book. But I think oftentimes we very much piecemeal things too. So, there may be a fabulous book on pelvic floor recovery. There may be a fabulous book that talks specifically about lactation and how breastfeeding does or does not affect you in all of these different ways. But there's just no one central place that just deals with the topic of sexuality and postpartum, intermingled and interlaced with the multiple other challenges that are being faced at the same time. And, so why would a woman want to have sex when she's dealing with bleeding and lochia and engorged breasts and a healing pelvic floor and, back pain and fatigue? So, why, and so we have to say, because it matters. And here's how we help a woman to find her way back to herself and to this important, critical facet of her well-being. And so let's pass that conversation around.
Right. And so there's an opportunity, Benée, maybe to write a book, maybe with especially, your amazing dissertation work that you've done, but, maybe there's a book there that you could write for us to put that out in the space. Or anyone listening who is an author and would like to write a book on this subject, please do. I'm wondering if there's any books then, okay, so not necessarily, not that you found that are, really specific to like sexuality in the postpartum period, any books or resources that you would recommend for kind of reconnecting to your body or connecting to your body, and kind of maybe embracing your own sexuality, like maybe anything on those lines?
Absolutely. I love the work of Emily Nagoski. Her book, Come As You Are, is a must-have for every vulva owner. Absolutely a must-have. She actually recently put a new version out, and she also has a workbook. So her work is phenomenal and worth every penny. Lori Mentz created Becoming Clitorate. I think we talked a little bit about mindfulness, and Lori Brotto did an amazing work and research on mindfulness and sexuality for women, and her book is Better Sex Through Mindfulness: How Women Can Cultivate Desire. So I think those would be my top 3 recommends out of the gate for just, coming better understanding yourself and your sexuality and how your parts work and how desire works. And a lot of the things, the lies and myths that we've been told about our bodies, or assumptions we've made about our bodies from different things we've picked up along the way, the narratives we brought about our bodies from our childhood. There's so many things in our heads, right? And so I think it's often super refreshing to say, I'm going to read this book and I'm going to really learn some things. And so I would definitely start there with those three for sure.
Lovely. And I would love to give a shout out too, to the book, The Body Is Not an Apology. Sonia
Renee Taylor, she's amazing. I used so much of her work in my dissertation, and her workbook is awesome too. That's a great companion to the book. And so a terrific book around how we really see our bodies in ways that are so covered with the political and economic and sociocultural messages that come all around our bodies. And man, the political climate today continues to tell us about the worth of our bodies, and as states continue to make laws to make women less and less in charge of their bodies. So it's a conversation that we need to continue to have, and our voices matter, our sexuality matters, the worth of and integrity of the pieces and parts that make our bodies matter.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Benée. I loved this conversation, and I feel like we definitely have many episodes that we need to record, and to keep talking about this. And I encourage anyone listening to, like, if you have questions, reach out, to Benée, to myself, just get these discussions going. And so Benée, where can people reach you?
So I'm in the process of kind of recreating some professional social media for myself. But right now, my email would be the best way to reach me. And that's bejustice.integrity@gmail.com.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes. I will put the resources you mentioned in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing with us, your wisdom and, getting this discussion going. We have so much more that we can talk about, but at least, we've opened the door, and let's just keep talking.
Oh, it's a real honor to have this conversation with you, and to just be in the ears of all of the people listening, because I really honor, again, that sacred place that is sexuality for each of us. And so thank you so much for giving me the honor of sharing that space today.
Absolutely. Thank you. I am so happy to have started the discussion with Benée around postpartum sexuality, because sexual health is part of our overall health and well-being. My hope is that you can use this episode as a way to start the discussion with your partner and to explore your sexuality postpartum. Please leave me a comment and let me know what your takeaway from today's discussion is. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with any of your friends or family members who may benefit from it. If you feel you are experiencing any of the symptoms or issues that we discussed today, please reach out to any one of your supports. You can also go to perinatalwellbeing.ca for more information, blog posts, and podcast episodes. Check out our new episode every Wednesday.